changed a lot of things of how we define a biennial and define what a biennial should do and how a biennial should work, especially in Europe. And especially in Europe in a time where Europe totally changed from a very Western point of view to much more, going much more eastward, going much more southward, also having to deal with the war, and things like that. So Manifesta was, I think, for the European art scene one of the most important, or is one of the most important events. It's always a big deal where they will go next. It's like, who will be the next documenta guy? It's one of these silly things. Now they go to Cyprus. I'm sure Hedwig will tell us why they decided to go to that very remote, politically very interesting island. Hedwig will talk about 45 minutes and then there's time for questions. Hedwig just arrived yesterday and goes to Australia this night, so we're really happy to have you kind of snapped her from the airport. Sit her here. Don't let her see anything from Hong Kong. But
I will come back.
She comes back in 2 weeks.
In 1 month.
In 1 month, so we are happy to hopefully make it tour then. Okay, I just started slideshow and you start.
So I start my lecture, and what I did in the PowerPoint, you will see all the works which we produced from 1996, Manifesta 1, till 1995, San Sebastian. So, from its inception, one of the prime concerns of Manifesta, the European Biennial of Contemporary Art, has been to remove the shadows of a myth behind the organization of a major artistic event and to make transparent the evolution of contemporary art practices. With this in mind, you get here my personal private view of the first decade of Manifesta, which in its kind is the only nomadic biennial in the world, an itinerant biennial. It moves every 2 years from country to country. And you get a view from the stance of someone who has been involved from the very earliest days, when the picture was still at the phase of an unresolved thumbnail sketch. In any case, despite of the thousands of individual narratives involved, Manifesta is not a fairy tale. While Manifesta certainly incorporates fiction, after now the completion of 5 extraordinary editions, it has now become a true chronicle, because we worked on it now for 10 years. So as Toby has already told, my name is Hedwig Veeyen.
No, not this one, the one too small.
And I'm intimately involved in Manifesta since 1993, when we started the entire enterprise from Holland, the Netherlands. And I was performing many different functions. First I was project director of the first Manifesta, and now I'm executive director of the overall Manifesta organization. It's called a foundation. It's a non-profit organization based in Amsterdam, and our organization calls Manifesta at Home, because Manifesta is always on the travel. The purpose of this lecture is to give you a kind of alternative guided tour through the 10 years of history of Manifesta, and maybe to share some lesser known experience in order to give you kind of a broad perspective, what is Manifesta, and also to flesh out details of what has now become a quite high-profile entity, and maybe answering the question how Manifesta, as it is, has the ability to reinvent itself. So the issue of the lecture is, how is it possible for a biennale to reinvent itself all the time? After all, as we say, the clouds behind Manifesta is that we have tried to override the idea of hidden agendas in the art world. Hidden agenda also means transparency. This is what Manifesta wants to be known about. But what does transparency really mean? Is it admirable to be transparent in the art world? At various meetings the last 10 years in Europe, we, the Manifesta, have discussed whether we should provide a broader access to the knowledge Manifesta has accumulated over the years. However, our data is not merely digital. It is also a practical matter of involving personality to personality and providing a hands-on approach to the methods of creating new projects. This is what everybody in Manifesta always says. For example, the famous curator Hans-Ulrich Jobis always says, Manifesta is not a project, it's a family. Because young people are always involved, and we try to connect them to the more established people in the article. After a Manifesta, we also try to work as a family together to all other projects. As always, in the Manifesta there are more questions than answers. Our archives currently serve as the role of the spirit keeper of Manifesta, existing along the biennial exhibitions. Should, for example, the archives, which are mostly documents pertaining the memory of the previous shows, travel from host city to host city, because Manifesta is not like the documenta taking place in always one site. So what do we do with the archive? Do we want the archive to travel to other cities too? Or crucially, what is the difference between the off-show, all the research and the archival material, and the show-off, the Manifesta exhibitions themselves? One particular line of thought is, admittedly radical for an art biennale, suggests that maybe in the future, curatorial teams might wish to be liberated from the task of a physical organization of an exhibition at all. Because in Manifesta we always say to the curatorial team, you are totally free, artistically free, to do whatever is necessary for you at this state of where Manifesta is. So sometimes I say you don't have to organize an exhibition, make a book, make a radio program, do whatever artistically is necessary. My lecture here cannot provide you as an overall aim of all the Manifestas from afar. To dissect its ever-changing historical and social and geopolitical aspects is maybe better tackled by somebody else. From too close, you cannot write your own history, I think. This is why the Manifesta has recently commissioned a partner organization called Roommate, Barbara van der Linden, who also did the last year campaign at Biennial, and a Princeton editor called Elena Filipovic to develop a separate analysis which is reflecting critically on the appearance of Manifesta. It's a project that is steeped in a wide-angle context of art, history, politics, society, tracing from the early 90s till the middle of the first decade in the third millennium. Unfortunately, this is why we commissioned those two external people to reflect upon Manifesta. They have proven to be distant enough from the subject to be objective, and yet close enough to understand its specific parameters and to avoid, hopefully, all the rhetorical pitfalls. Why did we commission to outside people? This is about the idea of reinventing yourself. We want to know from the outside view, from the art world in general, what did Manifesta do? Did we actually achieve what we said in the beginning of the 90s? We want to change the role of biennials in itself. And did Manifesta actually do what she promised to bring Eastern Europe, which was closed at the beginning of the 90s, and Western Europe more together? And this is why I said you cannot write your own history. If we would write about it ourselves, it would be a self-fulfilling prophecy idea. So therefore we invited those two separate academics, and Barbara van der Linden was one of the curators of Manifesta in Luxembourg, Manifesta 2. And MIT is going to publish this book, and it is a very extensive research, which is not only taking Manifesta as an example, but how did the art world change, especially in Europe, when these political changes, the fall of the Berlin Wall was effectuated? What did it do for artists? So the general history of Manifesta is more or less known, and it's recorded in its consecutive editions, recounted through the exhibitions, as well as through the profiles of all the players, and today accumulated in one shared experience. Many precise facts are already presented in many ways, but the potential of this publication I spoke of is in its power to critically examine the cultural and political landscape in Europe, as well as leading the reader down to a different path, revealing the panorama of all the personal knowledge, opening vistas by presenting previously unknown data. And hopefully this Manifesta book, it's called Manifesta a Decade, will function for the art world as a multi-layered guide, helping to determine whether Manifesta has reached its original goals and how it has further developed against the backdrop of a changing Europe. At the same time, this is the first resource book we are producing for all the unpublished visual material and other documents from the Manifesta archive. So what you normally have when you produce a catalogue for a show, it needs to be finished at the opening day. But then you cannot publish the real works of art. So for example, this is the Manifesta 5 catalogue from San Sebastian, which is called With All Due Intent, and this is a work of Lawrence Wiener. His participation in Manifesta 5 was investigating the title of the exhibition. So in this book, of course, the real works are not published, because we could only photograph them later. And you will see at the end of this presentation all the real works. All this material, so what was Manifesta about, the works of art which were published, which were in the exhibition, will be combined in this Manifesta a Decade book. So this publication I spoke of is part of a larger series of a more structural theoretical program which is initiated by the Foundation in 2000. Aimed specifically at a critical analysis and a discussions of Manifesta's position while formally establishing the fact that it serves as a multifunctional platform for information and exchange. This is maybe also important for you to know that Manifesta always said from the beginning, we're not only a biennial, we are a network. We want to serve as a kind of a platform for people in the art world to really critically analyze who we are. This theoretical program, which structural is behind Biennale, is maybe also very interesting because this is how Manifesta is different than all the other biennales. Because the biennials only come in once every 2 years with a series, with the exhibition. Manifesta tries to have this structural program in which, more on a theoretical base, it also discusses all the questions which were raised in the exhibition. Because the exhibition always opened up many questions. Why did we do this and this and that? For example, Manifesta 5 took place in Basque country. As you know, San Sebastian is the home base of the terrorist organization ETA, which had a long history of striving for independence from Spain. A lot of questions were raised after Manifesta was there in 2004. Why did the curators not involve this political scenario in the exhibition? Those kind of questions are not able to be answered in the exhibition sometimes, and therefore we started this theoretical program to try to be more transparent and open in relating to what the public has reviewed on an exhibition, to answer more questions than only putting an exhibition on. For example, our goal was, because in the last 10 years we accumulated this huge archive from all the cities who did Manifesta. And our goal was to utilize this passive paper archive, because archives are mostly compiled of papers, as a means to transform our information into a proactive resource archive. And this theoretical program primarily focuses on the development of mediating tools in order to provide a more stronger foothold to audiences. It incorporates, for example, public accessible databases. If you go to the Manifesta website, you can go to part of our database. It involves artist archives from Europe for more than 2,000 international and European artists. It involves seminars as the Manifesta coffee breaks. The Manifesta coffee break is an invention of some of the curators in which they said, if there are so many questions after a Manifesta Biennale, let's organize a summer school. So every half a year, we sit together for 3 or 4 days, eat, drink, talk. We call it a Manifesta coffee break or the tea break. So together we have a coffee, we say. But in the meantime, we talk about, did we really do what we want? Is it still worth, for example, one of the main questions, is it still worth being focused only on Europe? Is this valuable in the third millennium when everything is global? We organize series like the Decoding Europe series. It's a series of discussions taking place in Amsterdam in which we invite all kind of different people from certain cultural backgrounds. For example, we had a group of culture producers from Serbia. We had a group of culture producers from Lebanon, and asked them to present their work in the context of Manifesta. We also publish our own journal, which is called the Manifesta Journal. It is the first journal. It's a very theoretical and academic publication. It's published every 6 months, and we do it together with Victor Misiano from Moscow and Igor Sabel from Ljubljana. And it is the first worldwide magazine focusing on curatorial practice. Because in Manifesta, a lot of curators say, for every target group, there is a magazine. The butchers have their own magazine, the fashion industry have their own, but curators do not do this. Why is that so? Because there's so many questions, there's so many investigations and analyses necessary. So this is one of our projects in this structural theoretical program. These activities were not solely organized by Manifesta itself, but we always co-produce or commission issues to external partners throughout Europe. And this is maybe another thing, how we, after all, the original parameters and structures need to be reinvented. So this is maybe also an issue, how Manifesta tries to change the idea of a biennale. Let's go back a little bit about this theoretical program. So we worked for, let's say, the last 6 years with more than 400 organizations worldwide to set out all these different projects. And we tried to focus on the fact that these projects were not only involved by curators who play part in the so-called, what we say in Europe, the inner circle of network, not involving only the famous names, but really try to activate people who are a little bit more on the periphery. As I told you, there's Victor Misiano from Moscow, Igor Sabel from Slovenia, Ljubljana, but also people from Vienna who work upon our archive. So the archive is not, for example, digitalized from Amsterdam onwards, but we commissioned it to an organization in Vienna called Basis Wien. Manifesta also collaborated a lot with curatorial training programs in the world, like Bard College, like the curatorial training program, the Apple, to involve young trainees in the setup of the exhibitions. We worked together with the Liverpool Biennial and all kinds of Liverpool arts organizations. We worked last year with CACs in Vilnius, in Riga, in Tallinn, in the Baltic countries. We published a series of small leaflets and a project together with the ICA in Sofia, Bulgaria. And for example, we did a big symposium at the opening of the Moscow Biennale. So sometimes the Manifesta organization is not only producing the Biennale every 2 years, but sometimes she is invited to participate in other organizations and to work more as a kind of a theoretical platform. Our ongoing projects provide venues and spaces for direct communication between artists and audiences. And along the way, unavoidably, we were a little bit afraid of Manifesta becoming institutionalized, because we wanted it always to stay like very small and loose. But the more you produce, the more you initiate, it starts getting bigger and bigger. But we made a decision. We thought the best alternative was maybe to re-institutionalize Manifesta again by redirecting our role from what was mainly an open-ended body to becoming a more substantial mediator, in class performing as a loose limbs go-between, involving the makers and the shapers on one hand, and the public on the other hand. So in this context, our fixed identity of what Manifesta was in the beginning of the 90s and now altered significantly. In some ways, Manifesta began to function as a crisis center for new identities. We use sometimes the metaphor of a diamond, multifaceted, focusing on crystallization processes, ever-changing, but trying to shine brilliantly on several moments, brightly. For example, during the first coffee break, which we organized in Liverpool in 2002, the most powerful argument was the need to redefine the ideology of Manifesta itself, since so much has changed in the last decade in Europe, not least of which the influx of other large-scale biennials, the process of art production, and the way the public perceives this today. It appears that for many stakeholders, it is not clear if the key words of Manifesta, nomadic, lucid, experimental, and emerging, were still relevant, and even if there's still an urge for Manifesta to exist and to perform. At this point, I would like to address some of the key issues which have been proposed as the basic principles of Manifesta. To some, there is still a level of uncertainty as to whether those functions were merely part of the idealistic invention stages of Manifesta in the early 90s, or whether they are quandaries which have remained unresolved for the entire decade. For example, one of the questions we asked ourselves, how can we continue to justify the nomadic character of Manifesta? Does the term nomadic here exist as an ongoing illusion? Or was it merely an easy metaphor for a traveling art show, superimposing the vastness of European thought onto a willing local community? Who knows? Some parties believe neither perception is now valid, since Manifesta's version of nomadism seems strictly negotiated and controlled by each host city. Nowadays, Manifesta cities strive to host Manifesta. As you might know, that Manifesta needs to look for another host city every 2 years. So there are negotiations, because 50% of the budget is paid by the host city, 50% by the foundation. And you can imagine that a lot of cities want to have Manifesta, because you get, the last Manifesta costed, for example, $2.5 million. So we bring in 1.2, and they have to bring in 1 million. So a lot of those cities see Manifesta as a meal ticket in terms of their own cultural marketing. And they attempt to overbid the competitions with higher starting budgets. For example, there's one city in Europe, it's actually a city on the borderline of Austria in Italy, who said, we want to have Manifesta because we want to compete with the Venice Biennale, we give you a starting budget of $4 million, and you have to double it with another $4 million. So they think they can buy Manifesta, they think they can use it to promote their own cultural environment. But Manifesta is aware of these machinations. So what we now do is we have become more proactive, energetically seeking sites which display an extra conceptual framework to further distance ourselves from this notion of trying to become the European cultural capital, which is a very famous institution because it has this enormous money from the European Commission, something like $50 million every 2 years, which involves this huge political structure. Manifesta, on the other hand, looks for places, sites, or regions which may not have a very strong infrastructure or have the ability to offer massive funding, but maybe suggesting an artistic breeding space or a breeding ground of smaller communities experimenting with new ideas. And we realize it might even be necessary to select a site for Manifesta where it's maybe not welcomed by regional funding organizations. Maybe with the result that politicians and their expectations need not to be feared but dealt with. So what is the geographical reality of Manifesta? As I said, since its inception, Manifesta has predominantly taken place in Western cities, with the exception of Ljubljana, Slovenia. It's the country next to Italy and next to Austria. It was the host of Manifesta in 2000. This was the fact that we were only one time in Eastern Europe was not purely out of desire, but often a matter for our own survival and continuation. While previous attempts were made to move Manifesta to places in, for example, Southern and the Eastern Mediterranean, this has only recently succeeded with the selection of Nicosia in Cyprus. We're now working there to set up Manifesta 6 in a bicommunal Nicosia. Manifesta made a great effort to push for an edition hosted in one of the former Warsaw Pact states. Candidates for the selection of those host cities included Budapest, for example, in the run-up for Manifesta 3, in the run-up Warsaw, in the run-up for Manifesta 4, Tallinn in the run-up for Manifesta 5. And all of those cities made it to the final stages. At the first edition, which took place in Rotterdam in 1996, the second edition had already been scheduled for Stockholm for 2 years later. And this was of course announced at the opening ceremony of Manifesta 1, but when the Swedish initiators saw the final exhibition program, they hastily withdrew their support, citing that this was not at all what they were looking for as a concept. And maybe you saw it when you see a project like this. This was Oleg Gulek, who played Pavlov's dog for 1 month in the city of Rotterdam. And he was running around, or kept as a real dog, for 1 month in the city of Rotterdam, walking naked as a dog through the streets. And when the Stockholm authorities saw this, they said, my goodness, we don't want a Manifesta like this. So you see, sometimes things were changing through the process. Happily, Luxembourg gracefully took its place on the last minute, so we finally had a second Manifesta. In the years to come, numerous cities were invited to submit their interest in hosting Manifesta. So we went to city and asked, do you want to host Manifesta? Cities like Oslo, Norway, Helsinki, but also cities like Bari and Tirana together. Bari is Italy, Tirana is Albania. And we thought it might be interesting to do both cities together and to move a boat in between both cities. A city like Belgrade, which was a very problematic city in the 90s, of course, because of the war, we thought, how would it be if Manifesta is going to work in this kind of post-war environment? We also wanted to host a Manifesta in St. Petersburg to investigate what post-communist society would maybe bring us, and Prague. And also several unexpected Western cities, including a city like Dublin and Belfast, or Newcastle, Gateshead, Manchester, but also Palermo and Syracuse, were also seen as serious options. But none of these effectuated. Why exactly? In the early days, Manifesta financially depended on more than 75% of its budgets on local investments. As I said, now it's like 50%. And when the continuity of Manifesta at large was at stake, sometimes practicality won over wish fulfillment. So, as it is a nomadic biennale, we always, had to continue in a practical way. We could have taken the risk of finding a city with no local investments, but we thought then it might be too difficult. And certainly for the first three editions, so Rotterdam, Luxembourg, and Slovenia, Ljubljana, the lack of a strong, independent and multilateral funding system separate from the host city effectively limited our choices. There seems to be a myth that Manifesta, because it's European, is financed by the European Commission, which is absolutely not true. The European cultural capitals are financed by the European Commission. Only 10% of this $2.5 million is coming from the European Commission, the European Union. All the other money is coming from more than 300 international organizations, like Soros Centers, Ford Foundation, all the national countries and so forth. So you can imagine how sometimes it is very difficult to have no structural funding at all. Even not the Dutch government, although it is started as a Dutch project, never said we are structurally going to fund it, because the Dutch government says, as European countries mostly react, it's European, so the European Commission should pay for it. And the European Commission said, it started at the by the Dutch government, so you have to pay. So it's a kind of a game while we never had structural funding. So keeping this in mind, and these are all in mind, the rigid structure established in the early days of Manifesta is now somewhat undervalued. In truth, we were a little bit flexible from the start. When money was tight, we tried to rely on creative funding, as we call it. A great example maybe occurred during the Manifesta 1, when artist and board member Marlene Dumas, she's quite a famous painter, personally said, I'm going to sponsor 3 art projects, because there was nobody who wanted to pay for those projects. And it was a very good project of the Spanish artist Eulalia Faldocera. And we found out that, like in Manifesta, these normal divisions between being a visual artist like Marlene, and being a bureaucrat sometimes, being in the function of a board, and being a patron, disappeared in the process. Luckily, this kind of selfish, unpublicized sense of generosity has very much typified our organization. So sometimes people were playing really different roles, because, in the end, we were all working on solving our problems or solving situations. However, after Manifesta 1 in Rotterdam, which closed its doors with the visits, there were no funds for maintaining even the most basic infrastructures. So the backbone of this enterprise was mostly provided by Manifesta and the board and myself, who in a kind of a way volunteered in working in tandem with our professions. And only in 2002, we created a kind of more structural funds to have a backbone structure. So this is like called Manifesta at Home. And the Manifesta at Home, as I earlier said, is organizing the theoretical programs and is now co-producing the Manifesta Biennale. So after San Sebastian, for example, all the material from Spain came back to Amsterdam. We sort it out and we do workshops there with the new teams. We select the curators. We create the new staff for Manifesta 6. And we transport the knowledge to Cyprus to the next city. So after every biennial, all the material comes back to Amsterdam. As I said before, Manifesta is regarded as a network. It is regarded as an interactive workshop about the repositioning of contemporary art practices and taking the form of a freestanding exhibition program occurring every 2 years at different locations in Europe. And the exhibitions are merely one aspect of this continuing dialogue between artists, theoreticians, and everybody else. So Manifesta is, of course, no longer the only existing roving art event which shifts away from the dominating art circuits to locations at the periphery of Europe or internationally, and expanding the current contemporary art network in an unconventional way. It's quite clear that the reality of Manifesta could only thrive in an area in which non-institutional curators could work intensively together on each successive edition and developing new forms of collaboration, extend their own, and, of course, Manifesta's network, as the curators worked as cultural ambassadors and thus became integrated in the art world. In this respect, it might be interesting for you that Manifesta provided 2 of the Venice Biennale directors. It was like Manifesta 3 curator Francesco Bonani, who became the 50th director of the Venice Biennale, and Rosa Martinez, the current Venice Biennale, was one of the curators of Manifesta 1. So what Manifesta maybe, and this is what I would say, they're working as cultural ambassadors for the Manifestas, which meant that in the 2 years of preparation, we gave them a budget to visit everybody in Europe. And sometimes even the curators were too tired after their visits to set up the exhibition. Because this researching, to go into every city in Europe, from Glasgow to Brussels, from Marseille to Italy, to this was very important. Why Manifesta in such a small amount of time, only like 10 years, became a little bit of a kind of a high-profile thing. And it also was on a personal level, in terms of Manifesta is sometimes mentioned as a career machine for European curators. Because there were many young curators who, after Manifesta, because they met so many people, they were on the spotlight, they got like Massimiliano Gioni, who almost did not do any exhibition before he did Manifesta 5, this one, now became immediately after the director of the Berlin Biennale. So you see, together with Maurizio Catalan and Alice Sapotnik, so you see, it is functioning a little bit, not only for the curators, but also for the artists as a kind of career machine. And if we are talking about youth, then Manifesta literally has kick-started the careers of many of its artists and curators. As I said, most of the 17 previous curators of Manifesta have subsequently invited to create other biennials and similar events in Istanbul, Sao Paulo, Sydney, Berlin, Tirana, Moscow, Santa Fe, as well as I said, directed 2 of the grand lady of all of them, that is Tirana. Almost all of them have played major roles in various art institutions around the world in Europe, by directing museums or developing new programs and exhibition models. Most obvious is the fact that intensive cross-communication and affiliation have continued between former curators, artists, and coordinators after Manifesta has departed from each host city. This is also very important because a lot of people say, what do you bring to the local community? Are you just flying in, then put the exhibition or the program and then moving out again? And what we see is that most of the curators and also the artists keep their relationships with the people from the local community. For example, the organizers of each Manifesta become members of the overall board of Manifesta. So Lourdes Fernandez, who was the coordinator of Manifesta 5, is now a board member. Massimiliano Jordi and Marta Kuzma, become board member. So it is an organic structure to involve people also in the decision-making process for other things. Also what we see is that curators and artists keep on working together. So after Manifesta 5, Marta Kuzma and Massimiliano, we saw in other shows also involving not only the Basque artists, which they took from Manifesta 5, but also other artists. And also like board members and other people within the Manifesta network. There was a great installation in Manifesta 5. It's made by Jan de Koch. I hope you saw it. It is this enormous installation in a harbor place in which he built it, an architectural site within a site. And he was a very young Belgian artist, and it was his first really a little bit international show. And one of our board members is Vicente Todoli, the director of the Tate Modern in London. And he saw this piece and immediately said, "It's so great, I give him a solo show in the Tate Modern," which is opening the 9th of September in London. So you see that we hope that it's not a one-way, one separate collaboration, but we always hope that people keep on working together. And this is maybe a kind of illustration how the network of Manifesta is effective. Much has been said in Europe about the impact of working in a curatorial team for one of the Manifesta editions with all the group dynamics involved. And there have been a lot of accusations of creating artificial breeding of mini generations, as well as the exclusiveness of the selection process by the Manifesta board. We were a lot of time accused that we only took our friends inside, that there was no black people, for example, in the Manifesta curatorial teams. We were accused that there were not too many female curators in the Manifesta team. Because formally what the board did is we invited like 30 people to make a proposal, or we invited a lot of people in our network to come up with ideas which young curators would be interested, and we made a selection of ourselves. But most of the time, Manifesta was considered as a breeding space for young curators, as I already said, a career machine for emerging exhibition makers. And the basic rationale behind the selection of professionals from different geopolitical backgrounds, while bringing together different age groups and disciplines, was the fact that for us, it was essentially the foundation of a network which was based on intertwined working processes. So always in all the Manifestas, there were people from Eastern Europe and Western Europe. And it might be a little bit difficult, but Tobias knows this, that before 1996 it was not like common that curators from Eastern Europe were invited for international biennales. It was not even common that Western curators went over the border and to go to Poland, Russia, to investigate what the culture scene was about, which sounds very strange now. But even the Katarina Witt documenta, for that documenta, she never went to Eastern Europe because people were either afraid or there was no infrastructure. Only in the 90s, it was with the coming of the Soros Center. George Soros was a multi-billionaire. He founded in every Eastern European country a Soros Center for Contemporary Art. Only by the invention of this network, at the same time that Manifesta started her network, we could have information access to what was going on in Eastern Europe. Because before that, there were classical museums, but there was no information where artists were working, who were working there, etc., etc. And the Soros, I always say this in public, the Soros Centers for Contemporary Art at the beginning of the 90s actually helped that the Biennale, a pan-European biennial as Manifesta, could actually work, because before that it wasn't possible, even for us. So the clash of ideas and concepts leading to an interesting dynamic from which a program could only benefit. The fact that this process was sometimes overshadowed by the curator's wish to avoid confrontation. And to stick to a form of consensus was often felt by us, because we brought curators together in a kind of collaboration or project. And we always said to them, you are totally free to do whatever you want. But sometimes they felt, we don't want to make confrontations in between ourselves. So they went for a consensus. And I think in Europe it's considered that Manifesta 4 was this kind of consensus show. It was sometimes it's much more interesting to have confrontations in between curators than to work out a consensus, because Manifesta 4 was really like a flat show. The obvious exception was Manifesta 3, where the team openly confessed their dispositions and dissonance in public. And for Manifesta 4 and 5, local professionals were included in the selection process of the new creators, bringing the potential team and the local producers closer to each other from the outside. At Manifesta 5, there was the actual inclusion of an architectural team, the Rotterdam-based Berlage institution, as creative mediators in charge of the research for utilizing the undeveloped urban territories and studying the potential reconstruction of the exhibition sites. This is maybe interesting. The Berlage Institute, as part of the curatorial team, located 20 young architects for 3 months in the Basque Country to help the curators find the exhibition spaces and the why behind to put the exhibition there. And that's the reason why Manifesta 5 did not take place only in the center of San Sebastian, but moved to a non-used urban industrial site. And this industrial site was part of the program which these Berlage architects developed. Recently, we felt it necessary to free up the Manifesta curatorial selection by issuing a limited open call, whereby professionals at large were invited to assemble their own interdisciplinary teams, at the same time defining as to why their shortlisted team members would add extra value to their proposed working methods. This new model was the direct outcome of our wish to establish a decision-making process that would be less privileged, less inclusive, and less predictable. This way we could not be accused of being the foster parents to short-term artistic movements. The previous artificiality of the group compositions was avoided, since teams were composed of non-aligned experts who already trusted each other in terms of their expertises and methodology. The current structure is open not only to curators, but to any professional who is required to contribute to an interdisciplinary team. By the political activists, it could be writers, architects, academics, scientists, filmmakers, and artists, of course. And therefore, the team of Manifesta 6 for the first time is composed by Mai Abu El-Daha. She is a woman from Cairo, and she wrote a lot. She's a writer, she's an art critic, and she made 2 smaller exhibitions in Cairo. Anton Fidoko, who is a Russian artist working in New York, and he started Eflux. So he's more a mediator, a specialist in communication. As you know, Eflux is the Reuters of the international art world. And Florian Waldvogel, who is also an artist, but also a cultural producer. And he's coming from, he was trained as an artist at the Stedterschule, but now he is a cultural producer, and he's from Frankfurt. We are repeatedly asked why artists are not fully represented in our decision-making processes. And the fact is, I think they always have been. At one coffee break meeting in Liverpool, someone said that Manifesta should show more courage to the outside of the world. And our reply at that time was, but also our question is, who is there to coach the curators to show what courage is? In this perspective, we would like to change all the time. We would like to question our parameters all the time. And Manifesta derived from a conceptual issue confronting these ideological systems at the end of the 80s, the fall of the Berlin Wall in Europe. And it was a result of numerous discussions amongst representatives of national arts councils immediately after the fall of the Berlin Wall. Those institutions and individuals who were in charge of representing their nation's artists abroad were actively looking for a new interface. This is a little bit about how Manifesta was developed at the beginning of the 90s and why it was developed. Because before 1993, you had Venice Biennale, Documenta in Sao Paulo. And this was always about, more or less about national representation. In Venice, you have the national pavilions, and you present your national artists. But with the fall of the Berlin Wall, some representatives of Europe said, how can we change this idea of national representation? Does national representation still makes value if Europe, in a kind of geographical sense, is so much changing? Isn't it more interesting that people from Eastern Europe, like a curator from Eastern Europe, is selecting artists from Western Europe, and that sometimes a curator from Southern Europe is looking at what we produce in Western Europe. So, contemporary art was itself endeavoring to respond to the new political and social realities arising from fundamental changes on the European continent. And in the next years, in this 90s, an isolated landscape ruled by totalitarian system in half of Central and Eastern Europe was totally and rapidly replaced by a more open, ambitious society. And for example, the idea of open society, which is defined in Karl Popper's book Open Society and Its Enemies, was very influential in helping Manifesta develop its own perspective. And the fact that half of what was formerly a divided continent, because of the wall between the East and the West, was eager to dismantle its borders and reveling in a free market system, unharnessed press and juridical procedures independent from the state, suddenly made it possible to believe that it would be possible to devise a pan-European art event according to the basic rules of Western democracy. And this is a little bit about the ideological context in which Manifesta existed. So where is Manifesta at this stage in 2005? And what lays in store for Manifesta in the next decades, when it might well decide that its own particular momentum needs to slow down? And if we consider how to take Manifesta into a new realm, we need to address each issues, which could easily change overnight, and depending on the velocity of oncoming history. The topography of the cultural landscape in which Manifesta grew as a biennial late last century has irreversibly modified. Not only have important artistic events emerged from Southeast Asia, the Middle East, Africa, and Latin America, the profound discourse has been redirected, we think, from a previous European-American orientation to an overall encompassing global perspective. Worldwide, now more than 300 biennials, triennales, and quadriennales, each promoting their own specific flavor, currently play a role in the production and presentation of international art, and are all contributing to the globalization as what we call the domestic and the domestication of the global. So how can a nomadic entity, such as Manifesta, be compared to these other mega events without becoming submerged in equaling rhetoric? We do not see the identity of Manifesta in terms of its representation, its position and ranking as a competition to other biennales. Nor can we judge whether we need to alter its image as an event as the hippest, the youngest, and the most innovative. This is how we are seen the last 10 years. Should we disassociate ourselves from the tyranny of the geopolitical agenda and step away from socially conscious themes? The first steps were already taken in 2000. The relaunching of Manifesta turned a large-scale event into a more diverse project. This is this theoretical structure I recalled earlier, wherein a theoretical substructure now supports those themes suggested by exhibitions, opening new doors into the domain of contemporary art. Earlier I spoke about courage. Consequently, it might be necessary to constantly readjust our attitudes. And under this guideline, it would be incorrect and impossible to predict, for example, what Nicosia is going to present us in 2006. Using Manifesta 5 in Donostia San Sebastian as a prime example, the curatorial team of Marta Kuzma and Massimiliano Gioli sidestepped the obvious political issues of how art can be tainted if it is seen as a secessionist locale by incorporating new and far-reaching ethics and aesthetics. And the same can be said of Manifesta 4 in Frankfurt, mentioned a little-known thing in a financially secure business. Manifesta wants to be open and to promote direct lines of communication between arts professionals and the broader public. And by including now skilled international interdisciplinarians, there are fresh questions being asked to curators and host cities. This is one way of avoiding the creation of yet another elitarian group marketed through the existing cultural channels. And Manifesta, maybe this is to finalize, is preoccupied by many issues. It questions the current structures and hierarchies of art and is wary of fulfilling expectations. It aims to involve artists in all stages and in all processes and in its ongoing development. And it looks at inventing new means instead of focusing on past attitudes and operating outside the institutional diplomacy of contemporary art through the management of economical autonomy. There's a clear need for educational-orientated projects and audience development, and also in regions beyond the confines of Europe and its nearest neighbors. Therefore, we're very much delighted that Manifesta 6 is taking place in a biennial setting of Nicosia in Cyprus. And that for the first time, the Manifesta 6 will not be an exhibition, but the curatorial team decided, together with us, to turn it into an art school. So we changed, after 10 years, the Biennale in its exhibitional model to turn it into an art school. You would ask, why turn it into an art school? And this is maybe the answer of the questions I try to raise in this lecture. How can a Biennale reinvent itself? How can a Biennale try to find and found a stronger foothold to local communities? And this is hopefully, I cannot predict if we succeed in it, but this is hopefully what will be the experience